So we are delving into English furniture for once with this corner statement, not a mere cabinet, a polite but unyielding reminder that Britain once ruled the waves. Yes, this is a relic from the time of George II, the golden age of mahogany, crafted in the mid-18th century, circa 1740. But look at it standing here, just aloof in the corner, exuding this quiet superiority of its solid mahogany and this constant architectural rebuke to the vulgarity of modernism. I have at least incorporated a little bit of British absurdity into this presentation, but I don't have nearly as much knowledge about British furniture as I do French furniture. So I welcome anyone to please leave a useful elaboration of what exactly this is in the comments. We are delving into unfamiliar territory for me, but I do think that this is a relevant and very interesting, if not somewhat outstanding, certainly not very common example of relatively early Georgian furniture. Now, firstly, just to clear up the whole going over to England after 114 videos on French furniture, these two cultures rival one another for first place in furniture history as to who made the most beautiful works. However, they did so very differently. And I read a 1790s discussion of this topic. I'll try to cite that in the description. And the quote boiled down to something to this effect. I'm translating from French. But French luxury must be more brilliant, shinier, more frivolous, whereas English work is sturdier, more intense, and more striking. The writer continued, and I'll try to cite him in the video when I get back to my library, continued to say that where French work is vain, English work tends to be more prideful. All this to say that both cultures are renowned for the mark that they left on furniture history, the great art of cabinet making during the 18th century, but each did so in very different ways. Anyway, crafted by a cabinet maker who almost certainly had opinions about the French, but who, we notice right away, managed to combine the restrained drama of Palladian geometry with the golden hue of colonial mahogany here, liberated with all due decorum, no doubt, from some far-flung outpost of the empire, such as Jamaica or the coasts of modern-day Honduras or Nicaragua. So the term Georgian furniture is actually quite vague, as it applies to a long period comprising the reigns of four Hanoverian kings, George I to George IV, from 1714 to 1830. Some people prolong the style and furniture design history up to 1837. But in general, Georgian furniture doesn't mean any one thing in particular. You're talking about a succession of different periods and styles under the same name. Now, this piece comes from the time of George II specifically. I would date it to around 1740. Please do elaborate if you have a better idea. And anyway, the Georgian period also corresponds to the golden age of mahogany, which a forestry expert whose work I'm citing from an article that I read online by a woman who works for Scotland's National Trust, well, he writes that that golden age of mahogany is from 1725 to 1825. And so I think we can see a pretty stunning example of the use of mahogany in furniture with a piece like this. It is an exotic hardwood which was prized for its density and its ability to hold very crisp lines and carvings. And now today, this furniture seems to last longer than furniture made in other woods because this wood is pretty much impervious to woodworm attack. Now, of course, mahogany was prized for its unusual red color relative to indigenous European woods. We can see that George II pieces are fairly masculine, fairly strict in their proportions. And we can also see that neoclassicism, this return to the designs and the forms of classical architecture, that happens earlier in England than it did in France. We consider that the neoclassical movement begins in France during the 1750s, and it really doesn't take on until the 1760s and 70s. Here we are in 1740 with this neoclassical movement in full swing in England, pretty much as a reaction to the excesses of the Baroque style, which was in vogue previously. Now, the panels of the doors are wonderfully raised and fielded. That's a design feature of Georgian furniture and all sorts of furniture from this period. But it adds a look of prestige, and raised and fielded refers to how these panels are sloped upwards and their center portion is raised relative to the edge of the panels. It sort of says that we had time to conquer the world and still had time to bevel. And looking at a piece like this, as architectural as it is, and looking at the edges here, I do wonder if it wouldn't have been built to have been fitted into the paneling of a very specific room. Maybe somebody can leave a comment about that. I've looked around and I don't see any holes where it was necessarily tied into something, but still I have a hard time looking at this and not wondering whether or not it was part of some rather complicated system of paneling somewhere. Now, the hinges on this piece are in no way original, so perhaps leave me a comment if you have a suggestion as to what they should be replaced with. I see that there are several holes from various hinges over the years, but I like the way they look for the most part. The lock plate winks at you like an officer with an impeccable uniform and a questionable past. And then when you open this door, something that I find rather lovely is the scrolling of these original shelves. That's one of the things I like about this piece, is that despite my general ignorance of English work, when I look at this piece, especially when we take it out away from the wall, there are so many aspects that just appear exactly as you would want them to when you're looking at something that's purportedly from the 18th century. I also wonder if this isn't a little bit of original gold paint, perhaps gilding. It's sort of like the polychromy of a Gothic cathedral when everything was painted inside. And the same is true for some elements of furniture that's almost 300 years old. Parts of the original decor has worn off. I would wager that these shelves used to be painted gold, and we see some traces of that. But perhaps someone who's more informed about English furniture can comment. Now, down below, the lock is completely cooked. She's over with, and we just have a single storage compartment. This piece was delivered to me in a Land Rover from London. They drove it to Paris. I thought that was very fancy. I very much enjoyed the delivery style. However, there was a spider living inside of this piece that was so large, I think it might have literally belonged to the Queen still. I think she owns all the swans or any of the animals. But I survived, and I released it into the garden. Anyway, this corner cupboard is something that is fitted with boards onto which you probably would have stored cups, I imagine. But on some level, I have to wonder if this cabinet wasn't originally for much more than what it is today, which is a very interesting and amusing element of design in one's home. The degree to which this was ever practically used or appreciated is beyond me. Maybe they were as amused by it in the mid-18th century as we are now, although maybe corner cabinets were more of a staple in homes then. I think now they're sort of a rarity. I don't know many people who have corner cabinets. But let's go ahead and take a look at the back of the piece. I'm going to try not to break this. I put sliders underneath it so that we can do this without causing too much trouble. Isn't it an interesting thing to look at from the profile? Sort of slender when you see it from this way, isn't it? It's like it's barely there. It's just it's a ghost. But I like taking a look at the back of this piece, not because I know what I'm looking at, and I've only seen 4 or 5 English pieces personally, but I love these hand-forged nails, which to me seem very much authentic. So unless I'm wrong and anyone would like to correct me, the point of this video is not for me to lecture about English furniture. It's for me to show you something that I think is interesting and kind of surprising, and hopefully glean from the audience something that I don't know about this piece, which is probably 95% of what there is to know about it. But I like these different nails that are hand forged. Even this support board appears to be reasonably original, although we can see where the pediment appears to have been broken off at some point. And that is why we have this crack running along here that has been patched. It appears that the entire architectural pediment was snapped off at one point, and that's why they added these much later brackets to put it back on. You have to wonder what kind of clumsiness is required to break a piece like this so violently. Hold it, for the love of God. Hold the piece of furniture. It's just the one time in your life you need to not break something material when you're moving it. Anyway, so I wanted you all to see the back of the piece because I think it is a lovely example of what 18th century furniture should look like from the back. Now this paper, I don't know if that's original, but it certainly was added perhaps to black out the back of the piece so that you don't see the light coming through from inside, or maybe it's to keep dust from getting inside the piece as these boards shrank over time. Now, the blackened paint back here, I don't know if that's original or not, but I do know they used to blacken the backs of pieces with a type of walnut brine that would supposedly slow the woodworms. I don't know if that's the case in England, if it was just a stylistic thing to blacken the backs. But anyway, I've seen that on a lot of older pieces, and we seem to have that here. Let's pivot now to put this back in the corner. And like I said, this is an exploratory video, guys, about a subject that pretty well escapes me. I don't have the occasion to own and to see a lot of English pieces, being that I'm in France most of the time, and then my specialty is French work. So regardless of the lack of scholarly material in this video, I do hope you've enjoyed taking a look at what I think is a relevant and interesting, dare I say, unusual example of English period furniture. I think this is quite a nice corner cabinet. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe they're all over the place in England and everyone just lives around really stately Georgian pieces like this, but in my mind this is a fairly rare item, and that's why I wanted to show it to you. I like the diminished proportions of it. I've seen larger ones. I've seen ones that are far more complicated than this as well. But if you would like to go ahead and support the channel, please subscribe. That'll help promote some of the awareness of the difference between regular antiques and period ones, a relevant topic for anyone who's ever considering buying an old piece of furniture. I think there's some general education things that'll help people to know by watching these videos. And with that being said, everybody, I hope you have enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.